some crazy numbers in early vote totals are nearing 100 million as the election day has come today. It's pretty incredible, Krystal, and already we're seeing record turnout across the entire country, lines that are long and so much more. But before that even happens, 100 million people voted, blowing out totals in several different states. Texas beat its entire 2016 vote totals. I think they were one of several states to do so. It's just amazing to see how energized people are actually going into this. And I think the really fascinating part that I cannot wait until this thing is over just so I can see how and why
the entire
people voted.
nation cannot wait until this is over.
But probably they're like, I just want to sleep, and I'm like, I want to see this data.
I want the numbers.
The data. I need to know. I mean, like, why have people voted? Who were these early voters? I'm so curious to see who these election day voters, some indication that they're more Republican than not, but then also it's equalizing as the day moves on. It's just it's so fascinating. And I love this ultimate test of, it meets it really reality. And people are just voting, and you're going to see exactly how it actually will turn out after all the prognosticating.
Yeah, and it's such a statement on our time that even the method that people prefer to vote is partisan.
Political.
Yeah, even that is political and
true.
partisan. So we talked a while ago, and this is something that's been informing our coverage and the way that a lot of people have been thinking about this election, this Bloomberg data firm called Hawkfish.
Yeah.
They were the first ones that came out and said, look, you could really have a situation on election night where, because the day of voters are so overwhelmingly Republican, that you have what they called a red mirage, where it looks like Trump is running up the score in all kinds of key battleground states that is slowly reversed as the mail-in ballots come in. They have an updated projection, and again, this is Bloomberg, it's Democratic leaning, so take it all with a grain of salt, but this is the data that they're putting out there, and I think certainly comports with the idea of what we've seen in terms of the partisan split and the way that people are voting. So anyway, they're saying they still expect a red mirage, but not as much of a dramatic difference as they were originally projecting. Part of that is because the early mail-in vote was more Democratic than the later mail-in vote. Mm-hmm. So some of the day of election counting will be offset by the really early mail-in vote, which is overwhelmingly Democratic. So they still are projecting that you're likely to see states trending red tonight that ultimately end up in Joe Biden's column. Several states they actually predicted here, they're saying under one Hawkfish model that Biden would eventually overtake Trump in Arizona, Florida, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, but not in Georgia, Iowa, Ohio, or Texas. Again, this is one analysis. This is one projection. There are many more out there, but that's what they're saying in particular. Interesting insight from the campaign manager for Joe Biden. I mean, it's kind of interestingly frank or honest.
I respect it. I love it. He was like, hey, look, this is where things stand, and this is what Trump needs to do.
This is what Trump needs to do in order to win on Election Day based on at least the data that they're presenting to the public. Let's take a listen to that.
In some of our core states, we see that we have really strong leads in places like North Carolina and Wisconsin, and those leads are really important for us to think about what that means for Election Day. And what it means for Election Day is that with our advantage coming into North Carolina, where we estimate about 87% of the projected vote is already in, we believe that Trump is going to need 62% of the votes on Election Day in order to win.
So again, this is what they're presenting to the public. Maybe they have other numbers internally that paint a little bit of a different story. But to me, it basically accords with what we've seen, that Republicans would have to overwhelm the polls today, in person today, in order to make up the ground and the raw vote totals that Democrats have banked in key states like Florida, Wisconsin, and elsewhere.
It's conceivable, honestly. I mean, given how many Republicans said that they were going to vote on Election Day, how the Republican Party and Trump, that 2/3 of the vote of Election Day vote in North Carolina could be Republican. I'm still suspect that actually could happen. What was really crazy, if you saw underneath that in their presentation, was like 91% of the vote in Wisconsin. Again, these are the Biden campaign's numbers, and they've got a story that they want to tell. But I think that's fascinating. The Hawkfish thing, I'm just not entirely sure I agree with. I think we're going to know a lot on election night. I think we're almost generally going to have a good picture by 9:30 p.m. of whether things are going to be close, whether things are going to be a Trump win, or whether it's going to be a Biden win. I actually generally think that we're going to know that very early in the night.
I actually do too. I'm hopeful. We're going to know Florida.
Yeah, so quickly.
Tonight.
Yeah.
Polls close there at, what do they close at 8?
Yes.
And so we'll start to get data out of there. They count quickly. They're allowed to count those mail-in ballots early. So we will know Florida. And look, if Trump loses Florida, it's over.
Done.
Biden will be the next president unless something really crazy happens that none of us has absolutely foreseen. President Trump really needs to win Florida in order to win. If Florida's close, then there's a lot more question marks out there. But we are likely to know Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona. We're likely to have a good feel for all 4 of those states coming out of tonight. And so based on those 4, I think we will have a pretty good sense of what direction things are heading in. I want to give President Trump a little bit of credit here. He said something surprisingly responsible this morning in his interview with Fox and Friends. He said about, because there's been reports that he's going to declare premature victory, a la Pete Buttigieg in Iowa. He says on Fox and Friends, I think we'll have victory, but only when there's victory. I mean, there's no reason to play games. So hopefully he will stick to that, because I don't think the country is in a place where we can really afford to play games tonight about what's going on.
And look, his whole plan to declare victory was always far more premature. And by the way, if he is leading in North Carolina and all those other places, that does mean that things were dramatically wrong. So it'll be interesting to see that. But like I said, which is that in general, you can see historic amount of turnout that's going to come out. Historic Election Day turnout, we generally expect too. I saw that the upper bounds could be 162 million people will have voted by the end of the day today, which is incredible relative to where it was in 2016. It just shows a historic amount of interest in the election. I think this is the
first...
One
thing you can say for this president.
Yeah,
It certainly turned up the interest in politics.
Made everybody interested. 7 in 10 people in the late Pew polling said that this election result was important. That was like half in 2016 and like a third in 2012.
Wow.
So that is how much the dial has been turned up here.
We had one more piece of data that I wanted to show you. Morning Consult has been doing exit polls from early voters, okay? Because as we've been saying, so much of the vote total this time is from people who have already cast their ballots. And this accords with, what we've been telling you here, which is the early vote is overwhelmingly Democratic. They have it at Dems 50%, Republicans 29%. They also have it disproportionately women. And of course, we know there is a massive and probably historic gender gap that is also going to be a major story in this election of what ultimately goes down. So just to give you another window into who has already voted, who we expect to vote today, I thought those numbers were interesting too.
Yeah, it certainly is. So you have a full picture. Get ready for tonight. It's going to be fun.
Indeed. All right, more Rising for you after this.